Are men the enemy, Chidera?
Yes, because they kill us.
But some of them can be allies.
This is the thing. It's like, why is it some? Why are any of them killing us to begin with?
Welcome back to The Tea, the show where we spill what everyone else is too scared to serve. I'm your host, Myriam Francois. Before we get into this episode, I just want to take a tiny moment to ask you to do one thing for me, and that is to hit that subscribe button now. We're a small independent team, no big networks here, no corporate backing, just a handful of people who care deeply about having honest conversations and shining a light on what often goes unseen or unheard. So if our work does resonate with you too, then subscribe now on YouTube and join us on Patreon, link in our bio. And today we are diving headfirst into the digital storm with a guest who's made a career out of breaking the internet and the rules. She is the best-selling author of What a Time to Be Alone, the viral force behind hashtag SaggyBoobsMatter and Block Him Party, and a woman whose unapologetic take on self-love and feminism has sparked both adoration and outrage online. That's right, I'm joined by none other than Chidera Eggerue, aka the Slumflower. From body positivity to bold misandry, Chidera's voice has set the internet ablaze, forcing us to ask, is digital feminism liberating, or is it just another product to buy? Are viral trends like hashtag tradwife or boy sober a backlash, a meme, or a genuine shift in how we see gender? And let's not dodge it. Are men really the enemy, or is the internet just addicted to outrage? No filters, no easy answers, just the real talk that you come here for. So grab your mug, settle in, and let's spill the tea. Chidera, welcome to the show.
Myriam, thank you for having me, and I really appreciate that introduction.
Thank you for being with us. You have built up a brand online with, an army, a legion of fans. And I wanted to ask you about what shaped you in your upbringing. You were born and raised in Peckham to a Nigerian family. Tell us about what it was about the incubator of your early life that helped shape the woman you are today.
I really appreciate that question, Myriam. And like you said, being born and raised in Peckham to a Nigerian family comes with some complexities because, first of all, Peckham used to have the name Little Lagos because it was predominantly a Nigerian community that made up a large amount of Peckham's population. And being Nigerian means there are a lot of cultural values that are imposed on you, and many of those values include a lot of patriarchal ideas, a lot of things that follow this idea of, well, because you're a girl, because that's just how it is. That's often what I heard in my household. And from the age of like 10, 11, I used to challenge that. I used to ask my mum, but what do you mean I'm the only one who's going to wash plates and my brothers are not going to wash plates just because I'm a girl? And I kept on asking her about it, and she didn't give me an answer outside of because you're a girl. And then one day she realized that the answer, because you're a girl, that you should be the only one washing the plates after your brothers, didn't make any sense. And then everyone started washing the plates. So that was my first instance.
Quite the victory.
My first introduction to mini activism.
Yeah.
But it was quite difficult finding my voice and having a sense of autonomy in my household because I had a mother who was controlling from a perspective of, I'm going to control this child and be overprotective and instill a lot of fear in her because I love her and because I have a lot of my own fears as a woman. And I believe that if I use this method and this way of thinking, then I'm going to have an obedient, well-behaved daughter who would do as I say and not bring any shame to me, because a large majority of why the Nigerian cultural values revolve around women following patriarchal ideas is because there's this linking of shame to how a woman behaves and how that reflects on her family and her community, as opposed to her being her own individual. From as early as 7, 8 years old, I knew that I don't like this life. I don't like the way that I can't be a normal child. I don't like the fact that I feel so controlled. And when I got to the age of 23, I decided to stop speaking to my mother. And that's a decision that I have continued to stand firm in. I still don't speak to my mother. It wasn't an easy decision to make, but I knew that it was the only option I had, unfortunately. And there are a lot of young women who do come from an African background who have had to make that similar decision because of how hard it is to assert your own autonomy and maintain a relationship with your parents. I feel very headstrong in the choice that I've made, and it's had a ripple effect of positives outside of the negatives of Mother's Day being awkward and feeling this sense of discomfort around my friends who they have a lovely relationship with their mom. They can't relate to the idea of even thinking of cutting their mom off. Outside of that, the positives have included being able to stand firm in my boundaries when I'm around other people, especially men, because the link here is your mother is what you would perceive as an authority figure. And the world also sees mothers as these highly revered beings who cannot do any wrong. So if you are able to stand up to the most powerful authority figure in your life, which would be your mom in most cases, then similarly speaking, you can pull from that power and also stand up to men who think that they can use passive ways to control you. So that's how that decision has empowered me.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because it's very vulnerable what you've talked about. And I know that these are, even if, you're a confident person and you don't necessarily show the pain associated with that, but what you're talking about are very painful things. And so I want to honor the sharing of vulnerability. And I think vulnerability has been one of your strengths. You've shared a lot of vulnerable moments online. And I think it's allowed a lot of people to open up about similar or, other forms of vulnerabilities. You've spoken about, your hashtag SaggyBoobsMatter campaign. You spoke about your traction alopecia. I wanted to ask you, in the cases, particularly when it comes to your public image as a woman, how much of the criticism that you get around that comes from men versus women? And I ask because I tend to feel like women are very harsh critics of one another.
Yeah, such a good question, because during the period when I started hashtag SaggyBoobsMatter back in 2018, it was largely because it was men being very critical of my body. I didn't match their beauty standard. The idea of a woman having large boobs that hang naturally made them feel uncomfortable, because for the majority of men who were speaking about me on the internet, they're porn addicted. Their brains have been melted by repetitive imagery of women who have made changes to their bodies, largely for the most part to appeal to the porn industry. Whilst there are some women in porn who have made those changes to their bodies because they just wanted bigger boobs for their own personal self-image, there are a lot of men in their ears telling them you will make more money if you get a boob job, and they end up making more money when they get the boob job. So that's just their work uniform. That's how I see it. But for the men who were making those comments about my body, it was hurtful at the time, because back in 2018, when I was much younger, about 23 years old or so, I still had the belief that my worth was attached to my looks, and my worth only existed if men validated it. And for your worth to be validated, it's when a man selects you as worthy of partnership, because that is you being approved for love. It's almost like you've applied for buying a house. Congratulations, you've been approved.
Yeah.
It's that feeling of, pick me, quite literally. It's this idea of, if a man says I'm beautiful, then that must mean I'm beautiful, because if a woman says it, it means nothing. Thankfully, I'm now much more evolved in my outlook, where I value compliments more from women than I value them from men, because most times when a woman compliments you, it's not because she wants to have sex with you after the compliment. It's just because she admires you and she just wants to tell you, you look so good, girl. But now, what's interesting is, whilst I still get men trying to make comments about my appearance, it's no longer about my boobs. Now it's about my face, my teeth. Because when I put out my podcast videos as reels on Instagram, and those reels go viral and they spread their way across the internet, they're only seeing maybe from my head down to my lower chest.
Yeah.
And in them saying they don't like the way that I appear, again, it's them trying to take credibility away from what I'm saying, because men, funny enough, they tell on themselves all the time. It's just about whether you as a woman are vigilant enough to see it. So when a man is discrediting your valid points by saying, but you don't look good enough for me to believe you, it's because men assign us worth and credibility as human beings according to how fuckable we are to them, or according to how attractive we are to them.
Well, and the irony of what you're saying is that I think that it's a lose-lose for women on both scales, which is that it's actually completely regardless of how you objectively look. It's that men are seeking to invalidate you either as being too ugly or too attractive to be smart. I think that there's like only two options, right? You're either like, in my case, a dumb blonde, which I frequently get.
People
Hashtag
call you a
I
dumb
actually have a
blonde.
PhD from Oxford, but don't worry about that. Yeah, I get that all the time. Dumb blonde, you gotta love it. And of course, I'm sure that there's like a ton of comments that make comments that are also negative in a different way. But it's interesting that your point about the ways in which obviously a lot of the comments that women get about our physiques online are less about how we actually look and more about attempts to use the demeaning of our looks to minimize what we're actually vocalizing. And I think that that's sort of the main point, is that we continue to be reduced to our physicality in so many ways. And I wanted to ask you about this in context to a point you were just talking about, which was cosmetic surgery, right? And you just touched on it. It's a huge thing. I think we're part of a generation of women where it's completely normalized for women to undergo really invasive procedures from really, really young, right? So you're hearing about preventative Botox at like in your early 20s.
Like preventing what?
We'll get to that. Preventing what? I mean, imagine, God forbid, we actually age.
Or boob jobs.
Oh, yes, boob jobs, the BBL trends. I have to say that when I am in certain circles now, I observe that the majority of the women in the room that I'm standing in have undergone significant cosmetic procedures. And I know that we live in an era where a lot of people say, well, that's up to them. It's their choice. They may find it empowering. But I was wondering how you square that with the whole body positivity movement, because my understanding of the body positivity movement was that it's like, you're beautiful as you are. Like, you don't need to change it. But that movement has grown in strength alongside this trend towards more and more cosmetic procedures. So what's your view on that? Like, has body positivity failed? Why are we doing so much to try and look a certain way? How much of that is empowering versus trying to live up to a fantasy, often pornified version of a woman?
It's such a multi-layered conversation, because I think a lot of people expect that my response to surgery, especially as someone that created a movement like #SaggyBoobsMatter and cares about body confidence, a lot of people would expect my outlook to be, surgery is bad, don't do surgery. If you do surgery, then you don't love yourself and you have failed and you are a traitor to the body positivity movement. It's not as black and white as that, because when I think about what surgery does for certain women, one of the groups of women that comes to mind is trans women. Surgery is incredibly identity affirming for a lot of trans women who undergo feminization surgery. And the reason why the conversation is so layered and tricky is because outside of trans women who are affirming their identity through that kind of body modification, there are also women who have had children, and for them, it's been such a drastic change they've experienced in their bodies from their pre-baby body to their post-baby body, that they experience this such a strong disconnect from who they once were, that for them to quieten the ringing in their ears and to finally feel it themselves again is to get surgery. And I can't judge a woman for doing that. Of course, a part of me wants to be like, you can love yourself through it. However, I haven't experienced childbirth.
So I completely hear it at an individual level, and I probably would never dare personally to have that conversation with someone who's in that state. I myself went through a lot of body dysmorphia after I had my son, and your body does change after pregnancy in many different ways. But I think what I found really challenging as a feminist going through that experience was like a deep sadness around the fact that I had done something so powerful, the creation of life, giving birth. I mean, a man could never.
You crossed
a
the
man
portal.
could never. I really did. We do when we go through that experience, and so the expectation that there should be an erasure of that experience through the physical scars that I claimed through my battle. Like, I went to battle and I produced a child, and now you want me to erase the evidence of that? What, so I can conform to like a prepubescent teenage girl's aesthetic? For what? For who? Why?
For who? Well, a lot of women will say, so my boyfriend or my husband won't leave me. And this is where it gets even more tricky, because The sad thing is, even if you were to undergo that surgery for the reason of your husband or your boyfriend still finding you attractive, he was going to cheat if he wanted to anyway. It's nothing to do with how you look.
I mean, I have to agree that the notion that I think there's also this mistaken notion that we have internalized as women sometimes, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too. Is like, to what extent have we as women drunk the Kool-Aid of believing that there's only a single aesthetic that men are attracted to? And I wanted to ask you this in context of your dominatrix work, because I believe that there is a market for everything.
Oh, girl, there is.
There is a market
Yes.
for everything. And you don't have to look too far down the recesses of the internet to figure out that there are men who like everything. The pouch, the big, the small, the unexistent, the bald, honestly,
yes.
there's men who like it all. So why are we so constrained by a single vision of it? And I guess maybe, how do you encourage women to resist?
Oh, you know what's so interesting, Myriam? Becoming a dominatrix, ironically, is what made me feel, one, at even more peace with my body, and two, it healed my relationship with men. When, for those who are not familiar with what a dominatrix is and what kink and fetish is. So a dominatrix is a dominant woman who participates in the kink of telling men what to do. Men know that when they're around you, they're there to follow your command. They're there to be of service to you. It is consensual. It's a mutually agreed dynamic where your hard limits are discussed amongst the both of you. Nothing is done without you already being privy to it being done. Mm-hmm. But the crux of it, the main meat of it, is that you are a powerful woman and the men are drawn to that power. And what's so interesting is, like you touched on, I've never seen a more diverse assortment of women be worshipped and adored for how they look. I've been to kink events where I've seen women in wheelchairs. I've seen women who are mothers, obviously not bringing their children there, but from speaking to them, I know that they're mothers. I've seen women who are in their 50s and 60s. And ironically, when you're a dominatrix, you actually get better with age. It's not something you age out of. You actually age into it.
Like most things in life?
Like most things. But then they tell you, I see this on the internet a lot, oh, you're 30.
You have an expiry date? I
The
mean,
clock is
who
ticking.
set it?
Well, men believe that they set an expiry date, and they genuinely believe that we're going to follow their deadline.
But we do. We do, by trying
really
to maintain the appearance of being 25 forever, right? Because so this is the bit that I personally struggle with. Is there not a level of accountability for us as well as women in this conversation, right? We know there is a kind of section of men who will perpetually, encourage this notion that unless we are physically desirable to them according to these fixed weird standards, then we're worth nothing, right? Why are we listening?
Good question, because, and this ironically links to what I was saying about being a dominatrix. Being a dominatrix, you don't listen to men. So when you tell a man to do something, there's no argument. There is no, oh, but can I? No, I told you what to do. You haven't done it. So now your punishment is that you're blocked from having access to speaking to me. And if you want access to apologize or to hear my voice again, there's going to be an apology fee. You pay in cash. This is very serious. So as a dominatrix, we don't argue with men. So what's interesting about what you're saying in regards to this idea that we feel like we need to just listen to men and look like we're 25, but why? Why do we listen to men? I mean, we laugh at men every day for how ridiculous they are. They don't even know what a fallopian tube is, but they're the ones making laws about our bodies and our reproductive rights. So we know we're not supposed to listen to men, but suddenly we listen to them when they talk about how a younger woman is hotter. Well, yeah, you find a woman under 25 hotter because her brain isn't fully developed, and therefore you can take advantage of her. Because I've seen images of women who are in their 40s who, of course, granted, they're rich, they have access to personal trainers, nutritionists, dietitians, and maybe the odd filler here and there.
Sure.
But they look like they're 25. But the men are not going to go there because it's the naivety that they want access to.
100%.
Not the physical youth.
As a woman who is not 25, I would like to, completely concur with the notion that I think what is attractive in younger women is that we tend to be and tend to be, there are always exceptions, a little bit more naive to men's bullshit, a little easier to manipulate, a little bit more malleable and willing to concede in our life choices to please men. On that note, the trad wife culture has blown up on TikTok. For those who are not familiar with it, obviously it's this idea that women are, promoting these traditional gender roles. They want to go back to submission to their husbands. They want to cook and they want to clean. They think that the 1950s was somehow a golden age. What do you make of this trend? Is it a genuine rejection of feminism? And what exactly do you see these women as embracing? Because I'm pretty sure it's not embracing the fact that we had no rights, didn't have the right to vote, we had to ask our husband's permission to travel, we couldn't open a bank account. Like, I'm pretty sure that's not what they're idealizing. No. But I'm also not clear what it is that they're rejecting and opting into.
I think it's so interesting because when we tie in feminism to the conversation of the trad wife, a lot of the women who are embracing this trad wife ideology and are making content about it, they believe that feminism has given them the right to choose to be a trad wife.
Right.
Which puts us in this awkward grey area territory because, yes, I agree, feminism exists so that women have the right to choose. But then within the choice that you have been allocated, it's very ironic that you would choose to be a man's backup dancer. That's kind of how I see it, because there are elements of the trad wife lifestyle that you can take, and then there are some elements you can leave behind. For example, I don't entirely disregard the trad wife lifestyle as a whole, because a lot of the elements of the trad wife lifestyle include being with a man who has money, or being with a man who is happy to see you at home and rested, or being with a man who can afford for you to be a mother if that's what you really want to do. There are women who really identify with motherhood.
Totally.
And they just want to be at home with their kids. And
Absolutely.
as much as that's not me, I can give women the space to do that, because if you are a mother, you do deserve to have the option to just, you know what, I'm going to stay at home. I'm on my period. These kids are screaming. I want to stay at home.
I mean, it is a full-time job looking after kids. You know what I mean? We pay people full salaries to do this. Not very good salaries, but we do. So the idea that sort of staying at home and looking after your kids is somehow a holiday is a very disconnected perception of the role. So I completely concur on that. But I guess I'm just wondering whether, that there is obviously this wider backlash happening, right, online against feminism. There are, less and less young women identifying as feminist. I think there's a growing movement, particularly on the right, sort of suggesting that feminism has gone too far, that, Me Too kind of destroyed, gender relations, and now men are scared to approach women. Yes. And I actually, oddly, I feel like I've heard this from quite a few men, and they're like, I just don't know how to approach a woman anymore. I don't know if I can compliment her. I don't know if I can go up to her in a bar or in the street, or what's harassment, what is a compliment. I just don't know what the boundaries are anymore. Firstly, where do you stand on this idea that feminism has taken a wrong turn, that somehow along the lines, we have created an atmosphere which hasn't made it easier for men and women to kind of find a happy accommodation with all the variants that come from that accommodation, but actually that now it's harder than ever for us to speak to one another and identify our mutual interests?
Well, people like to say feminism has gone too far. I say it hasn't gone far enough, because men are still able to kill us, and there is an ongoing debate about, well, what was she wearing when he killed her? Or men are still able to make laws about our bodies and our reproductive rights without even knowing fully what our organs do. But apparently feminism has gone too far. And what you were saying about men vocalizing that they don't even know how to talk to women anymore, what if that's considered harassment? Well, if you don't know the difference between harassment and being a gentleman, I'm not going to teach you that. I can't teach you that. That's for you to figure out. I would rather men be scared to speak to me than for them to feel too comfortable to say what they want to me. I like the idea of a man thinking real hard before speaking to me. What's she going to like? Should I say the sentence like this or like this? How do I best approach her to impress her and allow her to know that I'm not a threat to her? That's the internal dialogue I expect a man to have, as opposed to, I'm going to tell her I like her tits.
Fair. Fair. But so on the flip side of this, though, we have the new kind of boy sober hashtag. We have, this movement in South Korea, the 4B movement, which is Korean women who are refraining from dating, from sex, from children, marriage. So, the sexual liberation movement of the 70s, which was obviously a feminist movement, was all about like, oh, I can go out there and have sex with whoever I want. And that was liberating. And now we have this other movement that's like, it's really liberating not to have sex with men. And I'm just wondering, is this just a swing of the pendulum? As in, we forget that there was a time where it was a lot harder for people to be able to have free and open sex as they wished. And it still is in many parts of the world, it's worth saying. Or how do you interpret this kind of shift where now celibacy somehow is the radical act?
It's so interesting, Myriam, because whilst there are a lot of women talking about being boy sober, abstaining from sex and leaving dating behind, there are still a lot of women who are using sex as a hobby, who are treating sex as a vehicle to receive some self-esteem, who still see men as an escape from themselves. It's just that the women who have chosen boy sobriety are louder on the internet because that's what's more socially acceptable to talk about right now. If you were to go online and talk about how you're just man obsessed and I just really love dick, people are going to be in your comments like, girl, have you heard of the 4B movement? This is the most I've seen women discuss celibacy and discuss abstaining from men, which I think is a swing in the right direction because it's not about demonizing having sex with men. It's about asking ourselves, why are we having sex with men? What do we get from it? How does this benefit me? How does having sex with men benefit me? And when we raise questions like that, a lot of people in response say things like, well, surely sex should be about having fun, shouldn't be about benefiting. But my perspective is that, well, no, actually, because men treat sex with us like it's their oxygen, like it's their life force. So most certainly sex is valuable to men. But sex is not as valuable to us as it is to men. That's why the porn industry is largely made up of male consumers. If it wasn't for men, the porn industry wouldn't exist. So what I think is that, yes, we're moving towards a world where women are more empowered to speak about the idea of putting sex on the shelf for a while and focusing on self-development. But at the same time, what I'm noticing is that a lot of women are still easily swayed backwards to the opposite side of the pendulum by guilt. And this idea that, well, men are going to be lonely if we don't have sex with them.
But there's also women, I think a growing movement of women in our generation who talk about sex as being something that they are as voracious for as men, and that's just something like they have sex the way that men do. And I think that's also a conversation that's largely unexplored because I actually don't know if men and women have sex in the same way or have the same expectations of sex. We know obviously from dating app data that, women tend to be looking for a longer term mate. And we know that men on dating apps tend to be looking for hookups. Now, exceptions to every rule. But I'm just wondering, do you think that that is somehow just a reflection of natural propensities, or is it that actually the dating apps are encouraging quite toxic forms of behavior, particularly in men, because of this sort of swiping game that exists in the apps, right? We're all addicted to swiping. I mean, we swipe when we shop, we swipe on Instagram, we swipe everywhere. So why not just shop for the new sex partner of the day?
I do agree that the structure and format of dating apps does encourage people who already see women as human beings to extract pleasure from. It encourages men to see us as like, oh, swipe, 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 swipe. But even if dating apps didn't exist, men would still be just as horny and they would see us as just as disposable as they see us. The only difference now is that we have the infrastructure of dating apps that are positioned in a way where, okay, you see a picture of a woman, you see her age, you see how many kilometers away from you she is. And what most of these men are doing, I promise you, is they're talking to their friend, having full eye contact with their friend, and they're just swiping, and whoever swipes them back, they'll just work from there. They're not looking at each profile like we do. We would look at the profile, look through the photos, read the bio, look at his star sign.
Do men read the bio? That's a good question.
They rarely read the bio. In my experience when I used to be on dating apps, I found that how I knew that men read the bio is when I used to put things in my bio like, I like men who are providers and want to give me gifts. And then they'll be like, well, I find you attractive, but I'm not into the money stuff. So you did read my bio.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
it's
so
like,
some do.
Some do. But the thing is, it's not about the bio. Like, you could write gibberish in the bio.
Yes.
But if they just look at you and they see you as what they want to sleep with, they're going to swipe you anyway. So it now makes you question, you know, if a man is attracted to you on a dating app, or if a man is attracted to you in the street or at a bar, you need to ask yourself why he's attracted to you.
So is your view then that we have been giving away sex too freely? And I ask because there's obviously like also a conservative trend online arguing exactly this. And also there are religious trends that argue for this. And I think it's a really interesting thing to come around to at this point in time, because for a long time it was taboo, actually, let's be honest, to say, I think that sex should be something that you hold on to until you have identified that the partner that you have in front of you is a partner of the caliber that you require to be able to actualize the life that you want, you know. And obviously, you know, I'm a Muslim, I'm from a community where we, you know, most people don't even believe in sex before marriage, right? And so, but the idea is that before you get married, you have a contract. Marriage is a contract, and in the contract you specify, this is, you know, the standards that I expect, this is how I was raised, this is what I want, and both parties do that. It's like a negotiation. Muslim marriage is not at all romantic in that sense. It's a very negotiated contractual process. But in doing that, you're also saying you only get access to me once we have agreed on some mutually defined parameters. So do you think that maybe some of what we're seeing is a backlash against maybe a culture that has lent too far towards sort of what men want? And not just men, there are some women I know who love sex and are on the apps for that, but not all. So are we seeing a bit of a backlash, do you think, around this cultural trend that sort of was like, yeah, having sex with everyone all the time is the best thing? And then there's a whole generation that's like, hold on, kind of hasn't really worked as well for me as you boomers told us it would.
I think a lot of people have a problem with women having stipulations and rules for their own bodies, especially because sex with women is something men feel entitled to. And how I know this is because when I share my ideas online about how I don't think sex with men should be free, I don't think we should be having sex with men for free, people are like, but that's prostitution. And I'm like, well, yeah, but this is what I said about marriage. And people were like, oh my God, how could you say that about marriage? Are you saying married women are prostitutes? Well, this is the thing. When we look at sex work with shame, it stops us from actually observing how there are so many parallel dynamics in our society, whether it's in sex work, whether it's in marriage. For example, a couple of days ago, I saw this image on Twitter and it was accompanied with some text. Now, this image was a jar full of about like $20 notes, but it was a very packed jar. And on the jar had a piece of paper stuck to it with sellotape, and it was a note written from a husband. He'd given his wife this jar that I imagine was empty to begin with. And the note on the jar says, each time you have sex with me, this is contributing towards your Christmas present.
Oh, God.
And it's like $20 note.
Wow.
So basically it's $20 each time you have sex with your husband. Now, that's sex work, right? But people will be like, no, it's just banter between a man and wife. But he's basically decided that having sex with you is going to be $20 a pop.
$20.
And you are working for your Christmas present. So you need to be incentivized to sleep with him. And I find that so interesting because if a woman were to decide on her terms, actually, you know what? For me to want to sleep with you, here's what I want from you. I want a house in my name. People will be like, oh my goodness, like, that's so wrong. How could you say that? What about love? Oh yeah, this is about love, because the man who loves me will not have a problem with proving it. And when men love you and take you seriously, they invest in you financially. And that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable to hear, because it's this idea that money and love are two very separate entities that shall never mix. However, when it comes to religion, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to these structures that we use as guidance in our society, money matters. And my husband, if at all I decide to be married, will absolutely be rich and will absolutely you give me what I want. And there is a man out there who will do that. Now, it's not every man, but there's a man out there. And if I don't meet him, guess what? I'll be single and happy just as I am now. So I don't feel like I'm in this do or die situation where it's like, I hope, I really deeply desire this man to do what I need. It's like, I already live a life that I love. But for a man to be in my life and for me to sleep with a man, he needs to be making my life significantly better.
Needs to be a value added.
Completely.
Right? The Tea is a fully independent, non-partisan production. No corporate ties here, just a small, dedicated team working hard to bring you honest, impactful conversations. If you believe in our work, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just click on that subscribe button now and join us as a Patreon. You'll find the link in our bio. A couple of years ago, I was speaking to a scholar about marriage in Egypt, where there is a really high unemployment rate, particularly among young men. And because it's a society where most people don't have sex before marriage, it was causing a lot of problems, because marriage is an outlet for people to get together and have sex. I mean, it's the truth. It's how people got to get together. And not everyone, I know there's a portion of Egyptian society that lives a different life, but for many people, marriage is the way that you find a partner and have sex and fulfill some of your physical needs. And I do regard them personally as physical needs for both men and women. And one of the issues that was coming up is that because Islamically a man is supposed to provide for a woman, these men were not able to provide because they didn't have jobs. They were trying. Many of them were graduates. They were smart. They might be from great families, but they couldn't provide because there were no jobs. And I think about that a lot, even outside of Egypt, let's say in our society, where, you know, a lot of working class men are struggling to make a living. A lot of working class people, many people beyond working class, right, are struggling to make a living. But there are also some really decent, good men in that batch, right? There are men with good values, who are kind, who want to take care of their family. They just physically can't. So are they excluded from the dating pool if they can't provide, when we live at a time where it feels so hard for a man to be the sole provider for a family?
Well, just like how women whom men don't find attractive are excluded from the dating pool. If a woman says, these are the rules, these are the rules. Because people ask me that question a lot. And oftentimes they phrase the question like, okay, Chidera, what if you meet this man and you get along with him and you find yourself falling in love with him, but he has no job and he's tried and tried, but he can't get a job, but you really, really like him and you get along so well.
I'm guessing you probably wouldn't like him from the start.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
He could be my friend.
He might be your friend.
So this is the thing. So the point you're making about, you know, men in an environment where they just can't get any jobs. Well, this is the problem then. If you can't provide for me as a woman, I'm just not going to be with you. I'm going to date a man somewhere else. And those men, guess what? For them, they don't have to be married. Sex is not a... This is the thing, right? I think for men, sex is this thing that they can't live without.
I think a lot of men would say that, yeah.
And that's why this is such a heavy topic, because the idea of me saying, well, if those men can't find employment and that's a non-negotiable for women, then they have to remain single, that sounds like I'm almost promoting this hate crime. Like, you saying that these men don't deserve love? I'm not saying they don't deserve love. I mean, their moms love them, their sisters love them, but you're not entitled to a woman's love. If she says, this is what I'm going to require from you, if you can't produce that, then I'm just not going to date you.
But that's going to be like, especially in our generation, a really high percentage of men, right? We live in a generation where I think it's close to 70% of households rely on two incomes. Basically, they cannot survive without two incomes. And so I guess what I'm saying is, like, you know, you're a high profile woman, you're a very attractive young woman, you already have a legion, I'm sure, of men who are desiring to give you all that you wish. But there are many women who are, you know, maybe in different situations financially, maybe they are divorced, they have children, they are maybe not conventionally attractive. You know, what is the likelihood really that those women can bank on a man just wanting to provide for them?
For women, we can partner upwards. And I mean this in the context of social mobility. We can partner upwards, but it will require a lot of self-awareness, because a lot of men who have money, they're more likely to be abusive towards women who don't have their own money. But this is why I say that being really headstrong in who you are and being very, very ready to walk away at the first offense is what will weed out the men who are more likely to be financially controlling, and also having your own money. And having your own money doesn't mean you yourself being a millionaire as a woman. It just means that you already live a life where you can manage and sustain your own expenses. So if a man comes into the picture and he's making things better for you, you're not suddenly becoming reliant and attached to this lifestyle. You're still keeping the perspective that this is still a man. At any point, he could switch up on me. So as this man is giving me money because he wants to, I'm going to be using this money to further propel myself upwards. So if you're a smart woman, maybe you've started a small business for yourself. You're using his money to invest in your business so that if things change and you weren't ready for it to change, you're leaving with more than you came in with.
To me, money creates a power dynamic in a relationship, right? And so anytime you're dating somebody who has more money than you, particularly within a patriarchal structure where he already has more power than you, then you're inevitably in a sort of situation of imbalance vis-a-vis that relationship. And I'm also, my personal experience in this realm is that wealthier men tend to regard women as more disposable because they have more of an array of women desirous to fill that spot. And so I just don't know whether I think that the money can compensate for many of the truly disgusting traits that I find in wealthier men who tend to embody kind of peak capitalism, right? Materialism, focus on material characteristics, your externalities, wealth, exploitation. I'm like, yes, he can pay for my holiday in the Maldives, but also he's an asshole.
This is the thing. There are those men who behave like that. And then there's the software engineer that just makes a lot of money from his job.
Fair.
And it's like, he's not necessary. I mean, this is the thing as well, right? I think capitalism is such an interesting talking point because people often tell me that me only dating men who have money means that I am a capitalist and I am enabling capitalism and I believe in capitalism. It's like, well, I just think that it's so interesting that we call women capitalists for just wanting a better life if a man's going to be in the picture. And if people want to call me that, that's their own observation to make. I'm not going to sit here and try and argue with them because they want to use that word. For me, I just believe that if a man's going to be in my life, he needs to make it significantly easier. And I think that, yes, there are some really, really awful men who have money and they treat women as disposable. And this is why I try to encourage women to change the way they view men. I think that we assign so much precious value to men when we like them. But I do think that we also need to start learning to view men as disposable too. And this is not disregarding their humanity. This is not saying that you can just cut people off and throw them away without explaining things to them. What I'm saying is to not over-attach to men, because at the end of the day, they are men and they will almost always move with their own selfish interest at heart. So I believe that as women, we need to be more selfish when dating them. So that means, sometimes when a guy approaches me to talk to me, the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm going to get judged heavy for this, but I'm going to stand in my truth, Myriam.
Say it.
But when a man approaches me to talk to me, the first thing I'm judging is, does this man have money? Because I'm just not going to date a broke man. Now, someone might argue, what if one day, because he's a hardworking man, one day he comes into money and you just got to, be patient and support him through. When is one day? Because what one man is building, another man has built. So what I'm saying in what one man is building, another man has built is there's a man that's already got it. I don't have to wait with this guy. He's already got it. So I don't, as a woman, have time to wait for a man, because what happens is a lot of women do this. They wait for a man. They even invest their own money in him because they see he's got potential and a vision, and they see him as the man they want him to be. They don't see him as who he is right now.
Yes.
And unfortunately, most of the time, once these men finally get that hypothetical money we were speaking of, they start to become attractive to the women they once couldn't attract when they were broke and struggling. And that woman that helped them get there stops being attractive to them because they remind them of their struggle, and they leave you for the women that they are able to impress. And it's such a sad, annoying story. And
many a Hollywood tale.
And for me, it's like, you know what? I'm going to cut past all that. I'm not doing that.
Going straight to
I'm going straight to what makes me happy. And I know a lot of people would hear it and think, will you be happy? What about love? What about the emotions? But that's all there too. It's just that the money is non-negotiable for me.
The question I'd have is more about the values that guide our relationships. And I ask this in the context of obviously somebody who, you know, trying to resist, you know, the ways in which capitalism infects every part of our lives, including our value systems, right? And I suppose, you know, within a capitalist framework, the notion of success is purely financially determined. And I'm just wondering whether there is something dehumanizing for us all to judge one another on the basis of a system that is inherently exploitative, particularly of marginalized peoples, and whether there is a form of resistance within feminism itself of saying, not accepting that men that are, you know, below standard in how they treat you, but maybe the standard being more in their values and the way they interact with women, care for their community, care for their family, you know, show upright moral values, than just their financial worth.
Well, this is the thing. I think when I say this, a lot of people think that they're just two mutually exclusive separate compartments, that a man is only either going to be what you described, like a man of values, a man that cares about women, a man that shows up in his community, a man that is actually pleasant to be around. And then there's the man that just has money and no other features to him.
Yeah.
It's both.
Have you found both, Chidera?
Do you know what? I actually know men like that.
Okay.
But there's other reasons why I haven't dated them. Just either because they're dating someone else, or I find them annoying, or I'm just not attracted to them. Sometimes I have conversations with women that are much older than me, like in their 60s and 70s, and they say to me, just go for the money. Just don't bother trying to pick a man for love and pick a man because they will betray you. And it sounds really dramatic and kind of scary when they say that, because it's like, what have you been through?
Yeah.
But they're all saying the same thing to me. And it's because I think what happens is when a woman prioritizes love in her perspective, that often means that she's ignorant to other things and she's only focusing on the feeling. For me, love and the feeling and the emotional connection, of course, that needs to be there for me to be attracted to someone, regardless of their financial status. But the lifestyle matters to me. The quality of life matters to me. I'm on the fence about whether or not I want to have children. Now, if I do decide in a few years' time that I want to have children, I'm picking the partner that's in the best financial position possible.
So I guess the counter maybe to that would be somebody saying it's not just about whether you, Chidera, can find a man that gives you what you need, right? It's about the collective and about all women being entitled and all people maybe even to a decent wage, a decent standard of living, decent maternal care. And that, you know, how does your personal pursuit as a feminist of wealthy men to improve your situation feed into the wider picture of collective feminist liberation?
Well, this is the thing. My life isn't a collective experience. It's my life, right? So I could sit here, because if I was going to take the route of, I'm going to pursue collective feminist liberation, I'm going to date broke men. I'm going to date broke men who read bell hooks and parrot to me all of the feminist sentiments that I want to hear echoed back to me. But my life is still hard. So for me, my idea of women being liberated, financial liberation is important because women are socioeconomically disadvantaged. Money is more important than we think it is. And I think that what makes this conversation tricky, not with you, but the general collective, is that when we discuss feminism with the general collective, a lot of it is still largely theoretical. It's still about this feminist world we dream of that we're not going to reach. I try to remind women that this feminist haven that we're all kind of working towards from our own angles, we're not going to see it in our lifetime. So why are we living like it's going to happen? We're not going to see men humanize us any more than they're already humanizing us now, which is close to zero. So what we need to do is create our own happy endings. And that will look different for each of us. For me, my happy ending is if I'm going to partner with a man, then I'm going to partner with the man who selfishly benefits my life the most. Because even when I am selfishly benefiting, that man still benefits by having me in his life. Now, other people might take the route of, well, I believe in collective liberation and I'm against capitalism, so I just believe in love and I believe in being with someone who I can talk about emotions and academic theory with. And that's good for them, but that's not pushing the needle forward for me. And that isn't helping women, because how I see it is it just keeps women poor. Partnering with poor men keeps us poor. And for me, social mobility matters in the conversation of dating men. And I also believe that men should be redistributing their wealth to women.
So you've spoken about this before, of course, these feminist reparations, which have earned you a lot of ire and backlash on the internet. So maybe let's start, for people who haven't heard about this term, what is feminist reparations?
So the word for reparations, for those who might not be familiar, I mean, it has the word repair in it. So it's a reparative gesture, usually from the person who has done the wrongdoing. So in this context of feminist reparations, the reparations are owed to women from men, because men are the reason why we're socioeconomically disadvantaged. Men are also the reason why we're likely to have a shorter lifespan. So if a man's going to be in our lives, he needs to pay it forward. Whether or not they're having sex with us, financial reparations are owed to women.
Is this all women by all men? And I only ask, obviously, because there is a dynamic here that is different for you as a Black woman. You know, reparations is part of a wider conversation around reparations owed to African descendant peoples. For me as a white woman, I don't know if maybe I owe reparations. I'm just wondering, is it all women are owed reparations by all men, or is it some women are owed reparations by some men?
I see it as systemic, just like how we believe this idea that all people are deserving of love, right?
Okay.
I believe all women on a systemic level are deserving of a relationship that feels reparative to them. Now, that will look different depending on the relationship you're in, depending on who you're dating. But I believe at the basis of that theory that women should be receiving more in relationships than they are giving if they are dating men.
And whilst we're kind of talking about this idea of kind of equitable relationships, and I'm observing, and I'm not alone, this huge trend of OnlyFans, right? Yes. I want to talk to you about this in the context of these economic times in which we find ourselves. Some people might say, because life is so difficult, I need to date a wealthy man, or because times are really difficult, I've taken to OnlyFans. And a lot of people won't even dress it up that way. They'll just say, it's empowering. I make a lot of money. And of course we had the, most recently, the kind of the Bonnie Blue video that went viral of her sleeping with 1,000 men in like 12 hours. And then we saw the consequences of that thereafter. I want to ask you, as a feminist who's part of this generation where OnlyFans has become really normalized, how do you feel about that trend? Do you buy into the notion that it has an empowering dimension because actually, sex work is destigmatized, because it's safer, because you're behind a screen? Or, is it another version of the ways in which patriarchy consistently tries to convince us that things are in our interest that are actually harmful to us?
I think that's a good question, because OnlyFans and doing sex work on OnlyFans, it's work. Is work always empowering? No. Even if you work as a beautician and you love doing eyelashes and brow tints for people and you genuinely get paid well, it's still work. There might be days when you're like, oh, I've got a really, really early client, got my period, I want to stay at home, but I'm going to go in and show up because got to get that money, got to, show up for my client. You're not going to be like, this is empowering. I mean, of course, you might feel empowered because this allows you to pay your bills and sustain your lifestyle, but I don't immediately associate work with empowerment. And I don't necessarily think that something needs to always be empowering for it to be fulfilling or for it to sustain someone, like in the context of OnlyFans. Now, the second part of your point about is OnlyFans feeding into this like patriarchal idea of like, well, men just want to see more of it. This is the thing, right? Whether or not women have OnlyFans, it could be technically argued that we are all feeding into the patriarchal desires of what men want from us just by us existing. Men want to see women all the time. They want to see our ankles. They want to see our lips. They want to see our fingers. They want to smell our smell. They want to hear our voices. They are obsessed with our existence, whether we monetize it or not.
But they'd like to see us, in many cases, bent over in a painful position, enduring things that they want. And we may end up having to do that for money in ways that are harmful to our soul if you believe in a soul, or into to our psychology if you don't believe in a soul, right? And I think I referenced Bonnie because we all saw the breakdown that she experienced after this incident. So I guess there's a long-standing debate amongst feminists over whether sex work is equivalent to other forms of work or whether it has a more harmful impact on us. And I just wonder whether this trend is sort of it's not just OnlyFans. I don't know if you've also noticed on TikTok, there's this whole trend of sex workers get ready with me.
Oh no!
Have you seen
that?
these?
What's this?
This is like get ready with me.
As in to go to the strip club or to go
not
where?
The strip club, no.
To see
clients. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. And I have really mixed feelings about it because I see very young women who are normalizing, getting ready to go and, pleasure a man so they can pay their bills, and talking about disassociation, talking about what strategies they have to use, right? And a lot of sex workers will talk about the need for disassociation. And I'm just like, are we just as a culture finding new ways to normalize things that ultimately are presented as empowering to us, but actually are harmful to us in ways that we may not even be able to measure?
Such a good point you make, Myriam, especially about the sex workers doing the get ready with me TikTok. First of all, I always feel a bit funny about sex work being talked about on TikTok just because it's an app that really young people and children use. Secondly, off the back of that point, I don't think that, it's hard to say because obviously a lot of sex work is survival, so people go into it younger than I personally think they should. But in my personal opinion, I don't think women younger than 25 should go into sex work, just because a lot of what you encounter when dealing with men, sex worker or not, what you encounter when dealing with men is a lot of coercion, a lot of psychological tricks being played, a lot of manipulation. And when you are on the other side of 25, there is more of a development of oneself that allows you to better navigate that work of discernment. Now, the point you're making about, women doing things that are uncomfortable and painful to make some money, that's a percentage of sex workers, because sex work exists on such an interesting spectrum where sugar babies are considered sex workers too. A sugar baby is a type of sex worker who goes on dates with men and receives gifts and trips and holidays and all the fun, lavish things. Sometimes they have sex with the men in exchange, sometimes they don't. But I think what's interesting about the sex work conversation is that it oftentimes feels a bit like women have to almost prove that they're not being dehumanized, because there are some women who genuinely have been able to experience a better life from doing this, but we don't get to hear those stories enough. What we hear and see is the women who are in more compromising positions, and the idea of capitalism tying into this, and the idea that women are making this decision because they have to pay their bills, because they have to look after their utilities. The same thing applies to a person working in a bar where really horrible, rude customers come in and that bartender receives abuse all day. And it's not a very fun job. It's considered a miserable job. But, as much as people might say, oh, just quit, you obviously don't like it here, but I have to stay because I need the money. People would
Do you
be
think
more...
that you can compare the two, kind of the kind of sex work that some women have to do with bar work? You think the same sort of harm is done? I'm assuming you don't like your bar work.
I'm not going to compare, pouring Coke in a jar to having anal sex.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that there are things women do because they need to make money, and sex work only exists because men want to buy that service.
For sure.
It's not going to stop existing. I'm not going to tell women to stop doing sex work because that's not going to change anything. In the same way, I'm not against OnlyFans, because how we got to this conversation was you mentioned the point about OnlyFans and this rise in women posting images and videos of them being, bent in all kinds of positions because men want to see it. This is so interesting because there are male sex workers too, right? And a lot of these male sex workers, they make content for the male gaze, like gay men who want to see that. But I rarely see people asking men, like, these compromising positions you're being bent in, doesn't your asshole hurt? Like, don't you think that as a collective for men, this is really bad for men? And do you think that this is empowering for men? No, because people kind of see that as a secluded, almost individualist experience when it's a man doing sex work and he's sometimes taking part in things that he might not entirely like, but he knows he's getting paid. But then when a woman does it, it's almost like her participation in this thing that she maybe sometimes doesn't like is a general statement for women as a collective, and it's bringing us all down.
88% of sex workers are women, though, so it is a majority. And I remember a few years ago, I think it was a Louis Theroux doc that he did on sex work, and it was,
I think I saw that.
I don't know if you saw it,
Yeah.
and what was so fascinating was there was a male sex worker on it. If you remember, he wasn't gay, he was a sex worker for women.
Yeah.
Do you remember? He was like, I've never had any issues.
So humanizing, right?
Everyone I've ever worked with
nice
is
to him.
polite, kind, pays me. I was like, he was like, have you ever felt fearful for your life? And he was like, no, never.
Because his clients are women.
And on the other hand, if you remember, there was a couple who were also doing OnlyFans, and the woman was talking about, because actually, although it was a couple, it was the woman being asked to perform for the camera, primarily, right? She was talking about how there were lots of things that the client base asked her to do that she felt were deliberately dehumanizing, degrading, and intended to be painful. Because
Did she do it?
Yeah. Of course, these were requests that they were getting as a couple for money, and they'd built their income on this income from the OnlyFans. And so she was like, well, the problem is that the requests get more and more extreme, just like porn has got more and more extreme,
definitely.
right? And so, yeah, I guess I'm only putting it out there because I do question whether the ways in which our culture has made
sex accessible.
Yeah, has I hear the argument about it making us safer, but for sex workers who, the other alternative is to go into a parking lot and blow a guy who could be a serial killer, definitely not the preferable choice. But I just wonder whether it normalizes a culture in which women's bodies are accessible at a price.
Well, this is the thing, right? I think the idea of women's bodies being accessible at a price versus women's bodies being accessible for free, because that would be the polar opposite, right?
Or not being accessible.
Or what? So we just abstain from having sex with the men?
Well,
is that what you mean? Or?
As in not accessible on their terms.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, right, what you were saying about that couple on OnlyFans where the woman is doing most of the work and she's getting all these more and more egregious requests. What's interesting is that I actually know a lot of sex workers, and they have you have boundaries. Like there are things that you don't do because you don't want to do them, and you make that clear, whether that's on your website or whether it's in communication with your client who's approached you for a potential booking. If they say to you, I want to do butt stuff, but you're not into butt stuff, then you're going to be like, I don't offer that service, but I know someone who does, I can forward you to them. Like, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. And, it's not every sex worker that just accepts money because it's a lot and she needs it. There are sex workers who they don't have to accept that. And I think on your point about sex being so accessible versus the opposite, where it's this idea that we don't have to do that, whether sex work existed or not, whether OnlyFans existed or not, men still feel entitled to our bodies. So I would personally rather see a world where women say, you want to sleep with me? There's a price for that. If you're not paying that price, leave me alone. As opposed to a world that I see more of now where it's this idea of, you want to sleep with me? Okay, fine. I hope you love me in return, though. Because it's like a lot of women, they're not sleeping with men for money. They're sleeping with men for validation.
Or they could be saying, I'll sleep with you, but you need to be invested in collective liberation of all peoples in all times.
Yeah, this is the thing, though. Rewarding men for humanizing me. That's how I see it. It's the same thing as, like, I'm sleeping with you for validation. It's this idea that, like, oh, you stand for collective liberation. Oh, yeah. Like, I don't understand that, because he should stand for collective liberation regardless of whether a woman's going to reward him with sex. And that's the problem. We feel like we need to include men in feminism and reward them for humanizing us. We feel this sense of, how do we get men on our side? For years and years and years, I've seen women asking this question, whether it's in books, whether it's online, this idea of, how do we get men to just see what we're saying? The answer is, you don't get them to see what you're saying because they just don't want to see it. It's already out there. Everything that could possibly be said has already been said in the context of trying to get men to humanize us, trying to get men on board with collective liberation, trying to get men to understand how feminism works. It's all out there. They don't want to do it. They don't want to participate in it. So us as women, I think it's very interesting that I see memes online and I find it so funny and endearing. I see these memes where it's like, when he's interested in collective liberation, and it's a woman that's like taking off her underwear because she's going to sleep with him. It's like, how hot. It's so attractive. But like, I don't see a man being like, oh, she's interested in collective liberation. Oh, I'm getting a hard on from that. Like, because men are not affected in the way that we are, so much so that we would reward a man sexually for seeing us as people. But men don't see us as more sexually desirable for seeing them as people, because that's already the default.
No, so I fully agree with the fact that, you know, there's no reward for humanizing people. I guess I don't know that I'd see sex necessarily as a reward in that sense, because I'd see it as, you know, if you're in a relationship with somebody who is equally committed to collective liberation, your sex together is an act of collective liberation.
Isn't that the ideal though, Myriam?
Of course it is. I'm out here setting the new bar.
But
tell me.
Genuinely, they see it as a reward. They see it, they might not verbalize it. And the thing is, it's not like they are mechanically viewing having sex with you as a reward, like they've put a coin in a machine and yay, the toy has fallen out of the deposit. No, what I mean is that when we have sex with men, we're communicating that what they're doing is okay. That's kind of like the basic level of it. And so what I think creates this confusing gray area for both men and women is that when we talk about sex being a reward, immediately the idea that women want to push back against is, but I'm participating in it too.
Well, I also enjoy it.
Yeah, I also enjoy it.
Yeah.
I'm not just giving him sex,
Right.
I'm having the sex with him.
Yeah.
Correct, and I completely agree. And at the same time, just because we see it in that way doesn't mean men see it in that way. Most of the time, men see sex as something that we're giving to them. They see it as something that they can take from us. And so that's why I think it's a tricky area when you're having sex with a man. And why I say this is because the other day, I was watching this show on Netflix called Cheat. And there was a part of the program where the woman who was cheated on, she has been in a process of rekindling and discussing potentially making up with her male partner. And at this point when she's talking, she said that he's in the doghouse, meaning that he's done something that has made her have to put him on pause. So she said, he's in the doghouse, but I felt really horny and I just wanted to have sex. So I had sex with him. And I found that really interesting because this is what women do without realizing. You have put a man in the doghouse, i.e. you have pushed him away for a bit because you need to reassess how you feel about him because he's giving you a reason to doubt him. Rightfully so, because I do think in taking space sometimes.
Well, especially if he's cheated, yeah.
Well, clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, he better stay in that doghouse. But then her physical urges have overridden her outlook, her rightful outlook on the relationship. And now confusion has been created on both ends because she has slept with him. So now his perception of the atmosphere between them is that, you know, I must be doing something right. I mean, yeah, she was upset at me, but she had sex with me. So everything is fine now.
She can't hold boundaries. She doesn't have self-control, so I can get away with anything. I mean, I definitely think that we live in a culture that sort of normalizes exactly that attitude, unfortunately. It's present in film, it's present in pop culture, it's present in music. How many R&B songs are essentially about
following the impulse? Right.
So, you know, but I completely hear you on that. I guess I want to ask you in that context whether, you know, are men the enemy, Chidera?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they kill us.
But some of them can be allies.
This is the thing. It's like, why is it some? That's really scary that I've said men can kill us and then it's like, but some of them don't. It's like, why are any of them killing us to begin with? And the fact that some of them can be allies. It's like, for a man to be an ally, it's almost like a cute choice he can make. Whereas for us, we don't have a choice when it comes to being vigilant about being murdered. Every time we step out of our house, that could be the last time we step out of the house forever. Whereas for a man, it's like, you know, he doesn't have to worry about a woman killing him. He might worry about a car hitting him though. You know, risky stuff there. But when I say yes to men being the enemy, it's a radical stance because that is the enemy I face every day when I leave the house. And while I agree with you, Myriam, that there are some nice men, those nice men are in the negligible minority, and that's not good enough.
completely hear you on that. Although obviously it's a majority of men that are not violent abusers, but it's still a minority, I would say, that are probably allies in the feminist struggle, who identify as feminist. I remember recently being at a table and saying, it's super hot to see the word feminist in your bio if you're on social media. I was kind of like playing with the audience because I knew it wasn't going to go down too well. And they were like, these guys were horrified. They were like, what do you mean? Like, why would are you saying that that's attractive? And I'm like, oh, how are you confused about
in the
this?
end times, girl.
Yeah. So there's two things I want to ask you about before we lock off, unfortunately, because I'm loving this conversation and we could go on for ages. One is about the reality that men are falling behind, right? In certain industries, they're falling behind in education, even the gender pay gap in certain parts of the north of the UK, women are now out earning men. Do these shifts in which men are economically falling behind, which was typically the premise for which they could be providers, right? It was like, well, men earn more money, they are overall more powerful and more employed, so they should be the providers. Does that shift anything in the feminist conversation around how we date?
The thing is, men falling behind, that's men's issue to deal with. Because what I notice is when we discuss men falling behind, which is a very important topic, by the way, somehow the conversation ends in, so what can we do to help them? It's like, it's not about us as women, you know? Men have only been able to fall behind because they have allowed themselves to fall behind, whether that's the men who are in positions of allocating certain budgets to education, or men who are in positions of focusing on young boys' mental health, or men at the power-making positions who have the responsibility of ensuring that young men are receiving the correct education. They're not doing their job. That money and that funding isn't going there. That attention at home is not going there. Men are falling behind everywhere, and that's a man problem. Which is the thing, men don't need that because they already exist in a world where there's a bias to them being more employable.
But if the shift happens, this is what, I guess, this is the direction of travel.
This is what I don't understand. The shift doesn't need to happen, though, because men are not marginalized as a group. They're falling behind. Yes. But that doesn't make them a marginalized group.
So I guess that's a very interesting point that, you know, is a big talking point today, which is if men, as so many in these podcast discussions online you'll find, will say, look, men are falling behind. They're earning less than women. They don't know what it means to be a man. They are lost. And I know you reserve little empathy for this category of men. I can see you coming.
I'm trying.
But I guess does it not become our problem if we do want to date men, which a lot of us do, when men have no idea what it means to be a man and they feel disenfranchised? Like, does that become our problem as well?
It becomes a problem, but it doesn't become our problem because we don't have to date men. You can be attracted to men, but if the men around you are all falling behind and they're letting themselves stay behind, then I guess we're not going to date them. Because this is the thing, right? What I find so ironic and interesting about men is as much as they show us in many ways how much they hate women, whether it's through killing us or creating laws around our bodies and our reproductive rights, they are so motivated by us. They're so motivated by the idea of being with us. There are men who will pick themselves up by the bootstraps because there's a girl they're attracted to and they really want to impress her. So it's like, I don't ever see a world happening where men are going to completely #let themselves go in the context of falling behind on employment as a mass collective, because what men do with their money is they use it to impress women. And if women were like, you're falling behind, that's unacceptable, figure it out. Because despite us having to resist being murdered, being socioeconomically disadvantaged, having less access to education and healthcare, we're still figuring it out. We're still somehow managing now. You're telling me we're now out earning men in certain regions of the world. So despite all of that stacked against us, plus our lives being at risk every day, we've managed to figure it out. So why can't men figure it out? That's my question. And it's not from a place of insensitivity. It's from a place of, if we were able to do it despite life risking odds stacked against us, then what's men's excuse? They don't have women waiting to kill them every day. They don't have women waiting to sexually assault them every day. You know, we haven't even gotten to the stage where we're going to be like, you know what? All men should be on birth control. And if as a man, you're not on birth control, I'm not sleeping with you. We haven't even gotten to that stage, which I don't think is ever going to happen, because still men make up the majority of lawmakers and law enforcement. But
Well, I mean, I guess if this data continues in this direction, and just to give a sense for our audience, so in the US, 83% of boy graduates graduate high school on time compared to 89% of girls. In the UK, a similar trend. Women now outnumber men in college enrollment. In the UK, men are less likely than women to receive top degrees. In some regions, young men now earn less than young women. For example, that was what I was referring to in the northern England, in the north of England.
Yeah.
Men aged 16 to 24 earn 4K less per year than their female counterparts. And so I guess as we see this trend progress and these young men who are doing less well than women enter the labor force and earn less money, the portion of men who are higher earners than us and able to give money in the way that you're suggesting is shrinking rapidly. And so I guess my concern is like, well, so there will be a huge pool of women who do want to date men and a huge pool of men who want to date women, but completely mismatched expectations of one another. And I wonder whether there's, I guess, a crisis brewing for us.
Well, they did say there's a male loneliness crisis happening, and I'm sure that crisis is only going to become more and more exacerbated as women become less forgiving.
I need a comment from you on the Cassie and Diddy case. Today, as we are talking, we know that Cassie is giving testimony in the case against Diddy. Diddy is just the latest in a string of high-profile men who are linked to sex trafficking, abuse, violence against women. What, if anything, should we be taking from this latest case in terms of the progress that the feminist movement is or isn't making? I note, for example, that the only person prosecuted so far in the Epstein case is a woman.
Is that Jelaine?
Correct.
Oh, wow.
The only person prosecuted in possibly the single most high-profile case of child sexual exploitation is a woman.
And is Epstein still alive?
Well, apparently he committed suicide, and funny that.
So we'll never know if he could have been prosecuted too. Probably doubt it though.
I mean, I'm sure that he's not living on an island somewhere where he's had plastic surgery and living his best life.
But to address your question about the Diddy case and how this links into feminism and whether this could in any way point to the potential of progress, it's hard to answer because, again, this is such an individualized situation, and hearing the details of the case, how other people were pulled into it. You know, Cassie, unfortunately, being made to sleep with other men. We're yet to hear other testimonies from potentially other women who were involved. And what's been difficult is seeing some women online defending Diddy, or even seeing some women online speaking about Cassie in the context of, yeah, well, weren't you the same person enjoying the gifts and the trips and the fun parties? Surely you can't have been abused. I mean, you were there for how many years? And it's such a difficult thing to see on the internet because when we observe abusive relationships, they're never entirely just abuse back to back to back to back. How an abuser normally operates is that, first of all, when you meet them, they're incredibly charming and enticing and very intelligent with their words. They know how to identify your insecurities and they play onto that. And as the abuse incrementally increases, they then twist into a person that's incredibly loving and affirming and makes you feel safe. And then you're in this cycle as the abused person of wanting their validation and holding on to that version of them that was really nice to you 2 days ago, when they realize maybe they've taken it a bit far and they want to get you back in that malleable victim state. So you're holding on to that time when, but he was really nice to me. And I guess that handbag he bought me to say sorry for the abuse, I guess he was sorry. And he said it's not going to happen again. And his team are calling me. I can't really just leave and I'm trapped. But you know what? I guess I can figure out a way to make this work. If I just stay on his good side, maybe he will come to the realization by himself that he wants to stop treating me this way. This is what I imagine the internal dialogue might have been for someone like Cassie. So it's hard seeing women and men on the internet speculating that she was in on it too. It's tricky because abuse is so layered and complex, but I'm never going to look at Diddy and be like, oh, you know, he can't have, I'm sure he didn't do all the things he's been accused of.
What do you mean, a rich and powerful men exploiting women? Surely not. It's unheard
and males
of.
Too.
Chidera, unfortunately, we are done. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today on The Tea.
Thank you, Myriam, for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was insightful. I learned a lot from you about the statistics. It was challenging. And I think that the people watching this will be able to take a lot from it and hopefully, like you said, go down their own rabbit holes.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. At The Tea, we are passionate about bringing you unique and meaningful discussions that aren't always in the spotlight. If you believe in what we're doing, we'd love your support. Hit that subscribe button now and join us on Patreon. Your support keeps us independent and helps keep these important conversations alive. Until next time, stay awake, support independent content, and we'll see you soon for more tea. Thanks for watching The Tea. Please remember to like and subscribe. And if you've made it this far, why not keep going and check out this episode?